How goes it, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Zimzilla, back at it again. Once again. Today, people. Thank you so much for everyone who is on right here. God Go G93, you are indeed first. What's up, Antonio? And for everyone who is watching either here on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, today's Antonio's birthday, so definitely give him a hello and a happy birthday. La 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 lava chicken. We've seen Alice is back. Hello again, Alice. AO from the Sea Monster, my favorite sea person, a seaman, some might say. Sam in the house, as always. Thank you for coming in. Kaskig, or Lau, as we know him in the civilized parts of the world. But yeah, no, it's good to see everyone here. We got Black Rooney. Praise be to Space King. Why did he delete the other video? I am actually not entirely sure why he deleted that video. I have not asked him, and if someone wants to reach out and ask him, they are more than and he's more than willing to explain that, he can do that himself. But as far as I know, I think he mentions in this video, if I recall correctly, it's because of like copyright or something like that. So yeah. There is Davik. It's good to see Davik in, as always. Intest Inspector, how's it going? And it's Charlie. It's Iraq War Charlie. But yeah, no, it's awesome seeing a lot of happy birthday responses to Lau. So, not Lau. Wow, I'm already tired. Antonio, I'm so sorry, Antonio. But speaking of birthdays and the like, things of that nature, what I've been wanting to do every time I start these is I will do a little showcase of art, things like that. So since it is Antonio's birthday, I will do his first, and then we will go from there. And as I do that, I'm just curious, how's everyone doing today? I hope everyone's having a good one. Of course, today's Monday. It's not the usual Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday Zim uploads. I just had this Monday off, and then I've got a lot that's going on, personal and otherwise, happening this weekend. So a lot of my work is scheduled around the days that I usually do my uploads, and I do have things down in the pipeline. It's just I didn't have them, or really like streams or anything prepped for it this weekend. I really just need it for myself, unfortunately. It's your birthday too? Oh, wow. Yeah, it is your birthday too, my man. But actually, Eric Zilla, it's his birthday, or at least I saw it somewhere. So even if he's not here right now, happy birthday to Eric Zilla as well as Antonio. But I do have the art pieces up, so let's show those off. So first we've got what he puts in here is like Hell Star is Space Godzilla, which I immediately just want to say it's like absolute Space Godzilla, which is a really cool design. The pink definitely wasn't what I was expecting when I had first seen the design when it came to Space Godzilla, but I've loved it all the same. And we've got this little Alienation one here, which I assumed in this case, because no one gave a description as to their pieces, I assumed it was a like a little baby Godzilla, and then Godzilla's here in the background. And with how the arms are shaped here, my immediate thought was like Terry from Dinosaur King, because his silhouette is very similar before he transforms to this right here. So that's cool as well. And then of course you've got his Godzilla design with his very iconic art, and I love how he does the katakana here for Godzilla's name, which also reminds me of, it's like the Project G picture that we see for the initial like story for Godzilla that looks like the name's written in blood essentially. So all these pieces very good. If I was to say which one I like the most, it's probably this one. But both of them are very good in and of themselves. And then we also got another commission piece for Nias. I don't think I saw Minecraft World in chat, so he's probably just busy at the moments. But yeah, this is another. I think it's the same. It was the same convention that he went to where he got the other Nias art piece done, which again, good job to the artists. Great use of how he makes it look like it's all lit up here, shadows. Probably putting good money for this. And then debate victim, Godzilla 2005. He sent in a lot of pieces, so I just was gonna do them kind of one by one as I went. So this was his Anguirus picture. Again, if I saw a more detailed version of this, I'd be interested to see, because he obviously did his Anguirus in a red color, which you don't really see at all for Anguirus. It's usually primarily browns, although red can sometimes be a highlight color because you see that on singular point Anguirus. But I do like sort of the concept that you're going for with this 05. And then we've got Lau's singular point Rodan. I think this is a different one than the one I showed originally, but just a more close-up version of him coming out of the magma here, which I always love Lau's art, which if anyone hasn't already, he is streaming on Twitch. I don't know, Lau, sound off in chat if you are consistently streaming on certain days and at certain times so that people can get a hold of you and kind of watch you cook with your creative process here, because it's awesome, man. But let me see. I'm doing good. And tomorrow, not only I get to play Jurassic World Evolution 3, but I pick up my dad from the airport after being away for 2 weeks. He's a minor, by the way. Oh, good for him. I have complete respect for people who do things like mining, trades, things of that nature. That's super respectable, my man. Awesome job. And obviously drive safe. Hopefully he gets back home safe. All of that. But yeah, actually, we just are under 10 minutes. So we'll just spend the last 2 minutes sort of going over what the premise is for this video here and why I chose to do this. So I remember this is, I believe it has to be the third Max Allo video that we've done, because we've done them in the past, and the first one was his response to Black Rooney. Then there was this one. I believe maybe another. I could be completely wrong. So I'm just really interested to sort of do this topic again, as it were, because as a lot of people have noticed, this is something that Max Allo had done in the past. That video is down. And in fact, my response to it on Zimcast was really the only way you can still find that video. So I wanted to see whether these points that he raises are updated, which don't really seem to be the case. And with the release of the -1 novel in English, along with looking more into the original book and the Godzilla First 70 Years, I think that there's a lot of things that I feel are missing or just completely wrong about Godzilla 54 and its response to Minus and Shin. Maybe more Shin, it's more accurate, but definitely not for -1, especially because a lot of the examples don't seem necessarily cherry picked, but just seem like poor readings of the text. I am streaming on Twitch in some time, and I'm on holidays starting tomorrow, but I will upload speed paints on my channel. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so definitely allow sound off your channel in the comments of this video when it's uploaded, and then we'll be able to highlight it next stream. Because yeah, everyone just either subscribe or follow him on Twitch or YouTube. But if he's doing speed paints, definitely follow him on here. Oh God, Max Allo. Good God. Is it though? Well, what's it called? I'm subjecting you to more pain as per usual. So this is your life, Black. You just have to deal with me ostensibly abusing you. Let's get into this, guys. And I don't believe this video is like significantly longer than the original video that he had done, but who knows? There we go. Hey, Zimzilla, I plan on making a one-shot manga next month. Hey, good luck with that, my man. Definitely post progress you have, and we'll showcase them on the stream. Why are we talking about Max Allo? Mechanicus 2 is coming out. Mechanical 2. Yeah, but like I'm not a Mechanicus player, so I understand. Like I know I love the Cogboys, but no. My son actually recently made a TikTok by the name of Globezilla. Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. You'll definitely send it to us because I'd love to highlight that. I know I don't have TikTok, but I know at least from the computer I can always showcase TikToks. It's usually my phone where I have issues showing them, but let us begin. And I know usually I do YouTubers on speed. I will probably do this 1.5 times speed because he does talk a little slow. So,
seeing as how both these movies are getting sequels in the not-too-distant future, and Toho's general reinvigoration of their own kaiju Godzilla production, I think it's a time that we kind of revisit this. And if you think you have seen this video before, yes and no, this is very much a new and different video compared to the previous one, which had to be taken down because YouTube's copyright system is an absolute clown show. And this is not simply a redo of that video, it is a very different video. It was kind of funny, though, in the making of this, looking back, how much of a massive shift in my own outlook on Godzilla Minus One has been since I first semi-covered this topic. That being the faithfulness of Toho's big recent Godzillas with respect to the original character, that is, Godzilla. It's a bit of a weird topic to cover since, as a character, Godzilla's kind of an oddity. He's a concept more than he is a character in the sense.
So this is essentially the Max Allo meta in the sense of Godzilla isn't a character, he's a concept. And because I already knew that this was sort of going to be the sentiment that was going to be going into the video here, I wanted to look up what faithful means from Google, at least. The reason why I'm using Google primarily is just because it's easily accessible. And as a result, everyone is going to be able to, at least once they look up the word, they'll all be able to see it. So it's not me pulling from some super obscure definition of the word. But in this case, what we'll be using for faithful in this case is that if you look up faithful on Google, it's gonna be the third one here, which is following the facts or the original accurately, which then the question becomes, what does accurately mean? But when he also uses the word concept. So if we go here, concept, hey, concept art, Godzilla concept definition. So a concept is an abstract idea, a general notion, which I assume would be the case. The use that he's using in this case is that's what he means by the word concept. If we look up character, a character would obviously have things like the distinctive nature of something, which does apply to Godzilla. In this case, Godzilla does have a distinctive nature to it. The quality of an individual in an interesting or unusual way still would apply to Godzilla. Strength, originality wouldn't really apply too much. A person in a novel, player, movie. Again, Godzilla would apply for those. So if we're looking at the difference between an abstract idea versus the quality of being, I would say that Godzilla is far more of a character than he is a concept. Godzilla isn't necessarily an abstract idea because there are certain traits, not only in terms of how Godzilla behaves, but also how he looks like, that makes something apply for the idea of Godzilla. Is this the Godzilla as a setting? I don't think so. I don't believe this is the case. I could be wrong, though. Anyway, I'm going to be leaving right now. Thank you for celebrating my birthday and for showing my fan arts. But before I go, do you have any word of advice for doing a one-shot manga? I have never done a one-shot manga, but I would recommend just crank it out. Like you're not like having to do a deadline for this. You have as much time as you need to make this. So pump something out, get some feedback for it, see what needs to be changed, see what people like, and latch on to that. And as you improve, you'll probably be able to find something that makes sense for you. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Smile. I think it was a different person. Anything is a concept if you stretch the definition of the word enough. Yeah, and that's another issue I do have with the Max Allo meta of argumentation, and it's that like words will be stretched to fit a weird definition, but then there's a lot of adjectives used to preface the thesis in order for the certain idea that he wants to get across to actually make sense in the grand scheme of it. And because if we go back, I found this like a while ago, which is why I just wanted to do not a screenshot, but at least look at it here. Because if he says Godzilla is more a concept rather than a character, this post right here is my opinion about the Godzilla and Kong character debate. He says, movies by Adam, Godzilla can't emote without Kong, Wingard's butchery have done more damage to the idea of the Godzilla's character than we can even imagine, because people would continue to make the mistake of why he doesn't work there. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because he's saying that Godzilla does have a character, but then also saying Godzilla isn't really a character, he's a concept. Because if we go back,
kind of an oddity. He's a concept more than he is a character in the sense of, say, someone like Superman is. He's been, well,
and again, if he's saying that he is more of a character compared to someone like Superman, that also, again, doesn't really make too much sense. The only reason why there's a distinction, and I think this also comes back to the response to Black Arena about the inversatility of Godzilla. And I think this has a lot more to do with the fact that because Godzilla's original conception as a character shifts so much in the early Showa period, Godzilla has a range of different characterizations from 54 to 75, but that slowly becomes more homogenized as you get into 84, the whole Heisei era, and the Millennium series, which essentially reboots for the most part. Godzilla's character remains pretty consistent and has remained so really throughout all of the Reiwa era. So this idea of Godzilla being a concept rather than a character doesn't really hold up for scrutiny, whether you're looking at it definitionally or just looking at the films themselves. Godzilla has a clear character.
But literally everything from an irradiated sea dinosaur to a super ancient guardian to a giant plant.
Let's go back real quick.
Everything from a character in the sense of, say, someone like Superman.
I think also, too, something to note is that Superman has just been more consistently written in terms of his themes and him as a character more than Godzilla, which I think just says more to how the writers of Superman were just better at curating that part of his character. Whereas because so many of these Godzilla films have been around for so long, people have just come to accept that character shift for Godzilla. And because of liking it when they were younger, they just sort of accept it, which I still like the movies where Godzilla is more heroic and less in line with his 54 characterization. That doesn't mean that they aren't out of line when it comes to the original intent behind the character. I'm going to go, though. You have a good day. Thank you very much, Alice, for stopping in as always. And I'd be curious to hear my thoughts on this video. Yes, please, definitely. I always love to see younger people getting into Godzilla and just saying like what their thoughts are and helping them improve in ways like that. I always love that. So you have a great rest of your day, Alice. Doesn't he mean that he has more personality than Superman? If he did say that, he'd be wrong. It's like when Jared Leto joke went, I'm an idea. The damaged Godzilla. Punished Godzilla, some people say.
He's been, well, quite literally everything from an irradiated sea dinosaur to a super ancient guardian to a giant plant, and even an extra-dimensional whatever the frick Ultima is.
It's really interesting that he brings up sea dinosaur, which is like almost every Godzilla, and then a few outliers, which are Ultima, the Polygon trilogy, and then Monsterverse, which, if we're looking at those case by case, yes, the Monsterverse's origin, which is different from character in this case, because if we're talking about Godzilla being a protector, the late Showa Godzilla and the Monsterverse Godzilla are the same in that aspect. In that case, you'd be talking about origin by calling him a super ancient guardian. And then plants, again, that has more to do with origin rather than character, which fair. But in terms of what Godzilla represents in the Polygon trilogy, while I don't think it comes across the best, I still think it is more in line thematically with the earlier depictions of Godzilla than, say, the late Showa Godzillas. And same goes for Ultima too, even.
For our two contenders today, we have Godzilla -1, who is mostly patterned in design and origins very heavily after the original, and Shin Godzilla, who is a completely reinvented origin that still leans on the nuclear involvement. This being both a retrospective of both films and a comparative analysis of their respective Godzillas, and sort of a breakdown of what the idea of a faithful version of Godzilla actually is. Because for as fantastic of a movie as the original is, it's one, far from perfect, and second, really no Godzilla has ever actually been completely faithful to it.
So I want to stop that right there because he's saying that no Godzilla film has ever been completely faithful to it. That is technically true. However, he'll essentially overplay his hand at the end of the video, because what he means by that means something so unbelievably unattainable. And then he also contradicts himself a few seconds later as he overplays his hand there. But I just want us to remember this. So everyone, remember this small little bit here.
really no Godzilla has ever actually been completely faithful to it, even Toho's own more recent to its creation. Meaning that the
As well as I also want to do this here too.
actually is. Because for as fantastic of a movie as the original is, it's one, far from perfect, and second,
So whether it's far from perfect or not is completely irrelevant. And again, by saying no film has been completely faithful affirms what I've said previously, in that he's having to add these weird adjectives in order for his line of logic to work, because he's saying like the film's perfect, there's nothing that's been completely faithful rather than faithful, because ultimately you can have something that is distinct from another material but still be faithful in terms of the spirit and the intents behind the work.
really no Godzilla has ever actually been completely faithful to it, even Toho's own more recent to its creation. Meaning that the original is kind of an anomaly in that respect.
And again, I think this is a lot of more quibbling on his part, because it wouldn't make the idea of a faithful or the first Godzilla an anomaly. It would just make it the first film that people would have to compare their own Godzillas to in order to be quote unquote faithful, which later on when he talks about it is an impossible task in and of itself. Godzilla as a whole IP, I would call a concept, but each one is his own character. In no movie has he just been bland conceptual myths. You can classify them in different types. It doesn't deny character. Exactly. Yeah, Godzilla's never been a pizza delivery man, and Godzilla's never farted rainbows. So Godzilla isn't just a concept. There is literal, tangible things we can talk about when it comes to Godzilla. You should be very happy, Vic. Very, very happy I allow you to have that wrench beside your name. Unfaithfulness equals versatility. Essentially, yeah. Godzilla's never been a bird. Exactly. That's another thing, too. Well, no. All birds are dinosaurs. Not all dinosaurs are birds. Therefore, Godzilla is not a bird. I might be back. We'll do more writing on a series. I just started Godzilla Monster Supreme with the leading monster none other than Zilla Jr. Oh, good for you, my man.
As for what the original Godzilla is, what we see is some combination between a stumbling monster wrathful at the world at large and a curious wandering creature in an unfamiliar land. While he is lashing out, it's not really targeted at anything specifically, being humanity. The film actually does a good measure in trying to humanize Godzilla, showing that he's not just all destruction and fire. This is because he's not just a destroyer, he is meant to be a victim just as much as he is the bringer of the apocalypse. As a mutant, he is a very much unwilling monster, and this is played specifically for tragedy. Unfortunately, a lot of this sympathetic quality is actually left out in the film. This is because the theater program, which is what explained this, is simply a pamphlet that was handed out in the Japanese theaters. It is not an actual part of the film proper in terms of what is relayed to us, but it does canonically exist, which is one of my issues with the film. It does not give a complete picture of the character, but they do, at least within the story, have references to this.
That's not what an incomplete character would be. It's that we are shown more nuance to the character with the theater program, but these ideas are pretty consistent with what we see on film. But the idea that he's not like lashing out at humans explicitly is just completely wrong. It's contradicted by several points in the book as well. And the reason why I'm going to be bringing the book into this is because he later on mentions that Godzilla -1's novel is canonical to the -1 movie because it was written by the same person, but both -1's novel and the original novel have differences to what's shown on screen. And same, I believe, also goes for the theater program. So if we're talking about external sources that either contradict or affirm the points being made, then using the book as a further extrapolation of a point does make sense. So when it talks about like Godzilla not lashing out at humans specifically, there are plenty of cases where Godzilla overtly goes and tries to attack people and does things not because he's curious, but because he's just angry and wants to kill humanity. So if you have the Godzilla book by Kayama, which is translated by Jeffrey Angles, You want to go to page 44. And it's going to be right at the middle, and it's when Emiko is running from Godzilla. This is coinciding with the scene when they're on Odo Island and Godzilla's head rears over the cliff. So we're just going to read an excerpt from it, and it says, as Emiko ran for her life, her foot got caught on a tree root, and she stumbled. Help. Godzilla saw her and opened his mouth. Her life was in danger. Shrinking up in a ball and not moving wasn't an option, but she also found herself unable to make a sound. Godzilla's face got closer and closer. So that is the case where you see once Godzilla's roaring at her, Emiko screams, and then we later find out when Shinkichi, which is more closer to Ogata in the movie, is talking to Yamane, and he mentions how Godzilla was trying to overtly kill Emiko in that scene. Another instance where you could see it as Godzilla being curious is with the train sequence when Godzilla first makes landfall, and once the train sort of hits his leg, he sort of chomps on, which you could see as a quote unquote curious kind of behavior. But when looking at it, it's not really the case in the book, because if you go to page 73, it says the enraged monster grabbed the train, which was now lying on its side, and crunch, bit down upon it, then crunch, crash. He shook it back and forth with the force of his enormous body. The back cars of the train groaned and were thrown all the way to the water's edge. So that's another instance where you see Godzilla not acting out of curiosity, wondering what it is, but actually just being angry at the thing that's near him. And we can go further to another page, which would be page 86. And right there. It wasn't exactly a battle cry, nor was it a shriek of sadness or pain. In the middle of a great cloud of white smoke, Godzilla shook his head and lifted his tail with bloodshot eyes fixed on the defense forces. He began to flail wildly around. And you can also see it as well on page 87, where they talk about how Godzilla's white hot beam is responsible for like cutting down all of these buildings. Or in his rage, Godzilla shook his entire body, and a strange white light shot out of his back. He opened his mouth to let out a roar, and with it, a white hot beam of light shot out from inside his bright red mouth. And again, go over to page 88. The firemen tried desperately to escape. Right behind them, Godzilla, who is as big as a small mountain, stomped along, smashing all the stores and businesses in his path. Each time he caught sight of a slightly taller building, he breathed out another white hot beam, whoosh, completely incinerating it. Before long, Godzilla was standing on the national highway connecting Tokyo and Yokohama. So, again, there's nothing in Godzilla's rampage here when he's moving towards Ginza about him being curious. In fact, higher up on page 88, it says Godzilla grew even more enraged. He spat out another strong white hot beam as he pushed forward, trampling every building in his path. And then we can shoot all the way to the end of the first book, which is when they're deploying the Auction Destroyer, which he'll talk about it being a quote unquote tragedy, but we see Godzilla actually is trying to attack the boats at the end of the book and the film. And it does talk about Godzilla being in distress, but it's going to be down on the lower part of page 109. And says, then right before everyone's eyes, splash, Godzilla's anguish-filled face appeared at the surface, spraying everyone. Summing up what remained of his last strength, he was trying to attack the Seagull being the boat that they are on when they're deploying the Auction Destroyer. So this idea that Godzilla is primarily curious and not overtly trying to kill people, or is a destroyer, not a destroyer lashing out at humanity, is a fabrication, I believe, on Alo's part. Godzilla novel audiobook read by Zimzilla? Maybe. Who knows? To be fair, Godzilla's a living creature, whereas for cancer, it's obviously disease. Oh, it's like Godzilla lashing out against humanity is arbitrary because he's attacking the people, and not all responsible for creation. He is evil. Exactly. Like, Godzilla is indeed a victim because of what happened to him, but that does not make his actions any less evil overall. I hate when people victimize Godzilla. When you get cancer, you don't question its morality or its origin or its economic state that led to it to act the way it is. You get rid of it. In this case, I would say that isn't a good comparison. I would say it makes more sense to compare Godzilla to any animal that is displaced from its natural habitat. it is tragic for that animal, especially if it's a predatory animal that is now closer to urban areas. And because things like overhunting or encroachment on its territory that is now coming into contact with more people, because its normal prey is being pushed out of those areas, it is now preying upon humans. That is tragic. It is sad. But ultimately, if you need to either relocate that animal or if that animal does not want to be relocated, then it would make more sense to put that animal down. In this case, because Godzilla is not just an animal, Oshiro Honda never wanted Godzilla to be just an animal, which is what was the reason behind Godzilla's durability. And as a result, Godzilla's behavior does have a certain moral weight to it. And in that case, yes, Godzilla decided to lash out, especially at the people who did nothing directly to him. And it would also, again, line up with the themes of the fear of nuclear weapons, would again make Godzilla's actions, without a doubt, evil. Just because the film says it doesn't make it true, actions speak louder than words. No matter what, think of the context is going to undo the deaths. Also true. I see, Monster. You know all about that. Exactly. You know all about that. Yeah, polar bears would be a good example of this. Godzilla's just an animal, but Ghidorah's a monster. Godzilla is indeed a monster. I think that, again, Godzilla is beyond just a regular dinosaur. The adaptations and mutations that allow Godzilla to be the way he is does take him out of just being an animal that has no moral weight to it and into actually being a creature with its own thoughts and its own behaviors. And since you could say that the authors are anthropomorphizing Godzilla, but considering that Godzilla 2 is also a fictional character, the anthropomorphization, I'm saying quote unquote, is less that and more just Godzilla's actual character, since there is no actual analog for Godzilla and it is not a mischaracterization of a real animal.
Hoping to portray him as not just a monster, but as something made from humanity's mistake.
Look, we're getting it. I've never actually had this happen before on stream, but I've had it happen before on when I'm just looking at videos. I get Godzilla ads, so that's fun.
Hello everyone, I am Max Allo, your American Allosaurus, and that was a bit of a long-winded introduction to this. Sorry about that. If you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe for more, comment your thoughts below, and leave a like on the video. Now, with our main man or main monster introduced, let's start with Minus Goji. Both since his film was the more recent one, as well as he visually sticks far closer to the original Godzilla's origin. That being, he originally hailed from Odo Island, where he somewhat lived peacefully and in harmony with the local islanders. This is actually something that was supposed to be communicated to us in the actual film itself, but much like the original movie, is not shown. In this case, it is done to Takashi Yamazaki wanting to have filmed these scenes, which are called pickups, basically stuff done after most filming is done and inserted later into production, but was denied by Toho. Thankfully, he actually is the one that wrote the novelization of the film. One of the few times the novelizations are actually canon, because he made both of them himself.
So, once again, that logic, like I said earlier, is flawed, because even though Kayama did not direct the original Godzilla films, he was the one who wrote the original stories that are the basis for these films. And these films, especially Godzilla Raids Again, are heavily influenced by the book. Raids Again's novella is essentially one-to-one with the movie, only just small changes here and there. So this idea that the novel is canon to the movie in this case makes sense, because Yamazaki wrote both. Doesn't really line up, and even in the book itself, there are several minor differences. One of them, I think, is a major difference, namely because it contradicts a characterization he has for Minus Goji, in that it is shown in the film but not in the book, as well as just ignoring passages from the book, it seems, as well. Imagine getting ads, couldn't it be me? Hey, I don't mind. I don't mind the ad. I don't mind the ads. And I believe, so you're talking about like lions, yeah. And there was a case of a series of mating lions devouring humans without provocation, which, yes, you are correct, Vic. That is one thing they do mention, is that it was probably due to a tooth infection, because they weren't able to hunt the prey that they normally would. And if anyone did not know, those are the man-eaters of Savo, which you actually can see those lions in the Field Museum in Chicago, which when I go to G-Fest, I usually go to the Field Museum, so I've been able to see those lions before, which is always fun. And hello, Minecraft world. How you doing? Jack Black is here. Is the original King Kong film based on its novelization? I don't believe it is. If I recall correctly, Lovelace, when they were writing it, they already had the whole movie set out. The reason why the novel came out first was because the idea of adapting things from novels was already big at the time. So as a result, they wanted it to feel like it had more prestige. So having a book come out before it became a movie added to that in a sense. Mothra is based on a book though? Yes. So I do have the advanced reader's copy for the Mothra book. It is very, very short. And in a lot of ways, it is very different to the movie, which I will be talking about in essentially a two-part review, because I'm going to want to do like a review and then a comparison between it and the Godzilla novels.
That does have these scenes. So while it is canonical, it still is not presented to us. Things like whenever he would surface up from the depths, bringing up all those deep-sea fish, the locals would go out, collect them, and use it to make hot pot. It helps establish his character.
Well, we literally do see that in the film because they state that Godzilla would bring deep sea fish. It's only the detail about hot pot that's not mentioned in the movie. So it's literally presented on screen.
Characterization in a way that somewhat lines up with his later rampage of the airfield. The hostility he displays is because of unfamiliar things, where, as we are presented, he's simply a hostile and violent creature lashing out at anything and at everything. More ultimately, his mutation twists and contorts his mind into something else entirely. The dichotomy of him being a curious but again still aggressive creature contrasts with his later psychopathic thirst for blood that he...
So that's the problem I have, is he has this weird belief that -1 explicitly is psychopathic and is out to kill people, which again, for anyone who is just tuning in, if you go into the original novelization for the first Godzilla and you go to pages 44, 73, 86 through 88, and 109, they talk about how Godzilla is enraged, getting even more angrier, and trying to kill people explicitly or just essentially out for blood or destroying things in his path, not out of explicitly stated curiosity, but just because he wants to stomp on things. And actually, another thing too is we can go over to page 92, and I want everyone who is about to hear what he says about -1, and for a particular scene, to keep this in mind. So there we go. And you're going to be starting from essentially the top of the page. That's the third paragraph down. It says, he let out a ferocious roar, which I'm not going to say the growl thing, so just ferocious roar that echoed high across the night sky. Then as if pleased with his victory, he began to retreat towards Sikchigi, which neighbors the bay. As he jumped into the water, splash, he sent up a huge spray of water with the force of his entire body. He started to push over the Kachidoki Bridge. A raging swell of water crashed like a tsunami against the shores on either side of the bridge. The metal of the bridge began to let out a long metallic creak, then crash. It collapsed into the water below. The bridge set up a huge splash that came down like a waterfall. In the middle of this, Godzilla brazenly continued his march into Tokyo Bay. So the one thing I want to keep in mind is essentially the second sentence where he's like, then as if pleased with his victory, began his retreats. Because this whole idea that this Godzilla is just curious and isn't like pleased with the destruction he caused makes no sense. And also, he's just letting out a roar, which is showing that he's pleased with his victory, which is considered psychopathic for -1, which Max Allo will explain here.
He goes on. Once he's changed, he's actually extremely focused and deliberate, shown actively hunting down and sinking both US naval vessels and then later Japanese fishing boats. Well, yes,
so he's going to say that it's different for the original, but let's think about this. So there's the Eikomaru, which had been swimming around there for years before Godzilla's mutated and was never sunk. It's only after his mutation that Godzilla starts to sink fishing boats, does it the Eikombingo Maru, then goes on the shore to Odo Island. afterwards sinks the pleasure cruise ship, goes on the land, terrorizes the mainland for a little bit, goes back to the ocean, then terrorizes it again. But here's what Max Allo says is the proper characterization of these scenes.
The original 54 version did destroy a ship at the beginning. This is because it more or less wandered into his own territory and he didn't actively seek to destroy them.
Considering the fact that Godzilla is using his atomic breath to sink these ships, there is without a doubt intent behind him choosing to attack these ships. Page 92 of the Godzilla novelization of the -1. It's we're looking primarily at the 54 novelization. I wish we got to see Godzilla chucking the boat. Yes, indeed. And here's the thing. I don't understand why he wants to use this word psychopathic because it doesn't line up with Godzilla's characterization. And again, if Godzilla is a concept and Godzilla can be anything, then Godzilla can't really be psychopathic because, again, these concepts and ideas have like a detailed understanding of what entails these things. So as a result, saying Godzilla is this or Godzilla or is that falls apart when you have established this idea that Godzilla can be whatever. And if Godzilla is whatever, then Godzilla means nothing, as a famous Black once said. So, like, I already have Faithful here, but let's look up psychopathic as I'm trying to like get around the books I have in front of me. So, affected or marked by a persistent pattern of antisocial, impulsive, manipulative, sometimes aggressive behavior, which is interesting because if Godzilla is displaying antisocial behavior and impulsive behavior, that means that Godzilla would be deliberately trying to destroy Japan, which is what he's seen doing in the first film, except for the fact that in -1, Doc hypothesizes that Godzilla now saw Japan as his territory. So if anything, -1's film explicitly makes Godzilla's rationale more materialistic than in the original, where they just sort of talk about Godzilla's habitat being disturbed rather than Godzilla choosing to attack Tokyo because of seeing as part of his territory and people just sort of being there. Would you describe someone who destroys ants as psychopathic? I wouldn't. I would say, like, in the case, that would depend on the context. So, like, if you're trying to kill ants because they're getting into your food, no, I wouldn't see that as psychopathic. If someone is deliberately just sees ants, like, just out chilling, like you're at a park or something and you see them and you just go to kill them, that would probably be more in line with what you could consider psychopathic because you're just killing them for the sake of killing them. They're not a pest or even like a danger to you. Same thing could be applied again for like senseless killing of animals, sign of psychopathy in those cases, because you're not killing them for any explicit reason. Like you don't need to eat, in this case, things of that nature would describe someone who is psychopathic versus someone who's killing for a kind of necessity. I mean, Godzilla 22 minus is more aggressive than 54. No, that's just wrong. Again, pages 44, 73, 86 through 88, and 109, 136. All of these pages for both the original 54 novel and the 55 novel explicitly talk about how Godzilla is enraged, has bloodshot eyes, and is trying to kill people and destroy things. Not that he's more like curious. If anything, like let's look at things that we see for Godzilla -1. So we're going to the Godzilla -1 novelization. So the idea that he's completely psychopathic, has no redeeming qualities about him, is contradicted in page 64. So from there, you're going to start all the way sort of like right at the middle. But somewhere on the ocean floor, not far from Bikini Atoll, a ferocious creature lay dormant. Godzilla, the same beast that had destroyed the Odo Island garrison, now stirred from its slumber by the same searing heat and radiation from the nearby nuclear test. Awakening, the beast cried out in unfathomable pain as its skin was scalded, its flesh burned, and its eyes boiled, turbid and white in its sockets. Any ordinary life form would have perished instantly, but Godzilla's extraordinary regenerative capabilities allowed it to weather the blast. And as its body regenerated, a rage began to form within the beast, an immense hatred toward whoever or whatever had inflicted this pain upon it. But even with this great power of regeneration, Godzilla's body would not return to its original state. The radiation from the blast had penetrated so deeply into its epidermis that the beast's cells grew distorted and irregular, making its hide rugged and rock-like as a replacement tissue hardened. And then it just goes into more detail about how Godzilla changed in terms of its behavior, not behavior, its appearance, but the Godzilla is ferocious, but not rageful. It's only after it is mutated that it has this idea of rage. That's just Man in the Suit edgy fanfic then. It's written by Shigeru Kayama. So the guy who originally wrote the Godzilla novels is Man in the Suit edgy fanfic. Like, so you're just wrong, O5, as per usual. Asocial implies a social norm. Godzilla doesn't have that with humans, though. Exactly. Maybe I'm thinking of a different point of the psychopathy spectrum. I'm thinking of a raging psychopath. Maybe he is thinking of a highly functional type of behavior. Again, it just wouldn't apply because, as you said earlier, asocial implies a social norm, which Godzilla wouldn't have. Convoy, O5 being wrong as usual. Classic O5L. Classic O5L in chat, guys. Yeah, kind of like Dexter, but the thing too with Dexter is the idea that it's very dramatized in the show. In the book, he's more detached and kind of fits the idea of a sociopath and a serial killer more accurately. But let's not get too much into the weeds on Dexter.
This extends further into -1's rampage into the cities themselves. He is actively targeting and destroying buildings and crushing humans, going for maximum destruction and terror, and relishing the bloodshed he is causing.
Again, it's never stated in the book, which you claim to be canon, that he is relishing in these things.
These are not the acts of a confused animal. These are deliberate psychopathic acts meant to instill fear and suffering in everything that isn't him.
And once again, he's saying that it's not a confused creature, even though the original book never states that Godzilla is confused in the actions that he's committing. If not, he's very angry, but lucid in the actions he is choosing to enact on these people. Same would go for Minus.
Especially given his roar that he delivers after utilizing his atomic breath, he revels in the death and carnage.
And it's that point right there. So it's that point right there where he claims that Godzilla roars because he's actively relishing this idea of the death and destruction that he's bringing. And we'll just have to go to when he's roaring in the book. So that's going to be page 125. And once again, for anyone who is wondering, it's going to be page 125 for the Godzilla -1 novelization. And this is right after Godzilla uses the atomic breath. So I'll just start from the Koichi's point of view, where he says, "Noriko, Noriko," he cried out, his voice trembling, but he knew there would be no answer. Looking back over his shoulder, he could see Godzilla still towering high above the wreckage, standing in place as its body healed the damage it had inevitably sustained simply by firing such a ray of devastation. Behind the beast, a giant mushroom cloud was billowing up into the sky where the National Diet building had once been. Then slowly, the beast began sauntering its way towards Shinagawa, just as an ominous black rain began to fall. As the tar-like droplets pelted his face, Koichi let out a screaming curse-like howl at the top of his lungs as Godzilla walked away, utterly indifferent. So, yes, if Godzilla was walking away utterly indifferent, then Godzilla wasn't relishing in the deaths or terror he was instilling. And you could argue that, well, after he did the roar, he just walked away indifferent. But still, there is no mention of Godzilla in the novel doing the same roar shot that we see here displayed in the movie. And the reason why I take so much issue with that is, by the metrics that Max Ello has set up in this video, the -1 novelization is canon to -1 the movie because they're both written by Yamazaki. He does not mention the books by Kayama, probably because Kayama did not direct the movies, even though his writing is what is the basis for the movies themselves. The issue I take with this is that if there are changes in the book for -1, then the character reads that are here in his video, which he's also saying should line up with the book, which aren't making sense while we're looking at this, shows a misread of -1. And in 54, there's also a misread because if you're looking at what is described of Godzilla doing in the book versus in the film, if you are adding things like he is rageful, enraged, angry, bloodshot eyes, etc., those are not overtly contradicted by what is shown on screen. However, the idea of being curious or not knowing what he's doing as he's moving through Tokyo is contradicted by the extra context given by the books. And I also just want to show a few scenes from 54 that in no way, shape, or form should be considered like curious or confused. If anything, they should show a similar level of relishing in the destruction that -1 does. The fact that the -1 novel has an official English translation before Monster Apocalypse and Project Godzilla is crazy. Well, -1 is just more popular, so that makes total sense. Does it go against his arguments? Probably. But let's just go over the few Godzilla clips that I do want to show. So let's do. I want to do this one first. It's on Internet Archive, and I wasn't able to find it anywhere else. And so it's this shot right here. So they're talking, and then they look above, and then they see Godzilla there, plus you see all the people here. The guys are scared because they're not like, we are seeing Godzilla looming around looking for other things that he's attacking. So at this point, he's already broken through the electrical fences and has already shot up a few buildings, which we see in other clips here. So they see it. They see Godzilla there. So then they begin to move. And then Godzilla decides to trash this right there. So this idea that Godzilla just is curious and not knowing what he's doing when explicitly shown to like go after a car for no reason does not line up with his characterization of Godzilla. And we can look at this right here. So this is when Godzilla is again walking and goes in. She uses atomic breath, has no reason to light up these buildings. Like if he's walking past them, just barreling through them, that makes sense. And we can go further. Yes, that's this scene right here. So again, just people running away from Godzilla. And then right there, we see him use his atomic breath and kill these people. So it's another example where for some reason, Godzilla is seen in Aloe's eyes as sympathetic, or not sympathetic, at least confused, doesn't know what he's doing. I'm just saying, because yes, -1 is an almost perfect movie, but the Picard novels have characters you didn't expect to return after so long. Yeah, well, if more people buy these Godzilla books, then maybe we'll have more of a push on this side to get them, to get the books into the States, because I would love that. I love the anime trilogy books. They are very interesting. Dude's pissed. I have no I have no concept. I have no understanding where this is coming from. I assume you mean like pissed as in 54 is. Thank you, Zim. This annoys me to no end. People discounting the novels when the novels are the original story. The scripts take from the books. I am just bad with words for some reason at certain points today. But yeah, the problem I have is that because there is several overt differences specifically with 54 the book and 54 the novel, like for example Shinkichi essentially being Ogata in the movie and Shinkichi essentially being split into those two different characters, while Ogata in the book is essentially a nameless character that never has a scene in the movie. That's like a big change. The love triangle not being present, which is something a lot of people praise about the original film, is that part of the film. So I think that's why a lot of people will be like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't align exactly with what's going on. Would you consider the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker to be as canonical as the movie is? I would say with any film and its novelization, novels will oftentimes be earlier versions of the scripts. So that's why you see a lot of differences with the Greg Key's Monsterverse novels compared to how they are in the films. I would say if someone is saying a character that like is not expressing themselves, like they're not saying, for example, I feel a certain way, and they do an action, and you look within the novel, and usually in the novels you'll have a inner character monologue for a scene. If within the inner character monologue there is an overt emotional reaction that that character is giving that contextualizes that scene better, things like that I believe make more sense to be canon, quote unquote, to a movie. Whereas if someone was to say, "Oh, what is the canonical events of Godzilla 54?" Because technically, you have the Raymond Burr version, and then you have the original 54. Are there two like timelines where things like that occur? Which at the time they weren't thinking of that. But if you were to ask me, like, does the novelization for 54 line up with King of the Monsters? I would say no, mainly because the 56 American re-edit changes so much already that you can't really reconcile too much in terms of what the book's implications have for that version of the story. But in terms of 54, the original movie and the original novel, there's a lot that you can glean in terms of what certain characters' motivations were in certain scenes. And especially with Godzilla's, because Godzilla as a monster is not going to be able to emote as much compared to just regular humans. Perhaps people are resistant to novelizations because they see it as patching plot holes in the film. Yes, that is often the case. And I know I myself have been guilty of this in my younger years and probably still to this day sometimes, where if you as a fan are invested in this material, you will then look to material that is official, see patches to something, and feel like, oh, that explains so much. So this has to be the reason shown on screen. I believe that in a lot of cases, when it comes to major plot beats, if the film is not able to explain it on its own, and then the novel does a lot of the legroom for you, then that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'd say that like that's why a lot of people take issues with things like that. So going back to Star Wars, the whole idea in like The Last Jedi that Rey is able to download Kylo Ren's knowledge, which is why she's able to fight on par with him in that movie, even though she already beat him in the other movie. Neither here nor there. But things like that, the film does not do a good enough job to explain that. And considering the fact that from the last film, we'd already seen Rey was able to find on par with Kylo Ren. This idea that Rey downloaded Kylo's information already feels like it is trying to explain away issues people have with the movie rather than actually seeing where the movie falters and where a book can help supplement the ideas that are going on in a movie. And yeah, like this is going purely, tangent aside, this is going purely off of Max Allow's own standards. The standard he says is that because Yamazaki wrote the -1 novelization, it is therefore canon to the -1 film. However, as we're showing in a key scene that he cites as being an example of Godzilla's bloodlust and him relishing in the deaths of people, the novelization he cites as canon does not have this scene. And if anything, expresses a characterization for Godzilla that's overtly different from what he is believing. So therefore, that is where I find the fault in. And because he has been adamant before about how much he believes Godzilla's character is psychopathic or overtly trying to kill people in -1 versus 54, and with 54 again, wanting to cite things outside of the films as being canonical or adding to Godzilla's character when he chooses is another issue I take, because I don't recall what's it called, Honda, Workayama, or Subaru, or any of those people explicitly writing the theater pamphlet for 54. I think maybe someone might have. If anything, we can check it right now. So And just it's probably we'll use the good old Wikizilla for this. So Godzilla 54 theater pamphlet, a theater program. Which that is a small image. So we'll share screen for that right there. But it's gonna be these, and I don't think it's gonna will it let me zoom in? Oh, it will. But as I do this, there's no way we'll be able to read any of this. But what is interesting to note here is that, for example, this version of Godzilla, that version of Godzilla are both based more off of the early maquette Godzilla design. It's also the maquette Godzilla design. Same with this, same with this. Same with really all of these shots are all based off of the maquette Godzilla design. The theater pamphlet also has Godzilla grabbing a girl in his claws, which, if we're going back to the Emiko scene, we can also highlight this as well. So once again, if you have the Godzilla novelization, the Kayama one, so the original 54, we'll go back to page 44. And it's going to be right above where we had looked at originally. And it says, Godzilla was bent over, picking up a young girl, judging from the silhouette in his claws. And I believe Kasaibu was also, Kasaibu mentioned that the cow wasn't in the book. The cow is in the book. So you just go up a few paragraphs up. It's essentially the second paragraph of page 44, which it says, what a terrifying face. In his mouth was a cow, red with dripping blood. So yes, the cow is still present in Kayama's original story. But yes, if we're going by the theater program, the theater pamphlet here, then you have Godzilla holding a girl in his jaw, holding not his jaws, his claws, and his design being based off of the early maquette design, which is different from how it's shown in the movie. And I believe really, so we'll find it this way, because I'm just gonna we'll have to go through to Shodagoji right here. And it's all the way. It's either going to be in this gallery or the other one. Nope. Where are you? Because it's the picture. Everyone is familiar with it when I bring it up. Finally, it's the one where you see Godzilla being exposed to the hydrogen blast, which I might have passed it, or it might not actually show from here. We might have to go back to the other tab. But actually, just because. So yeah, this is the other maquette Godzilla design, which you see in the theater program. So if the idea that, well, the theater program, I'll cite that, well, the Godzilla that's presented in the theater program doesn't match what we actually see on screen. So there's already discrepancies there. Let's go. Godzilla first generation. It's probably this. Or maybe it's not actually on the Wikizilla page, so we'll have to find it a different way, possibly. Yeah, looks like it's not. So we'll just have to find it. We'll have to find it the other way then. Before I do, I do like Max Ella's videos, but he seems obsessed with the idea that Godzilla is a confused animal. When you look at the movies, there's no confusion. He moves with a deliberate purpose. Yes, he does seem obsessed with that point, and he seems very obsessed with making people believe that Godzilla minus Goji is explicitly more villainous than like regular Godzilla is, which makes little to no sense if you look at what is shown on screen. But let me do Godzilla 54 mutation, because we'll probably find the picture there, because it's from that the Godzilla encyclopedia. Godzilla 54 mutation. There it is. Yep. I found it. Yeah, so it's this shot right here. So we'll just go to we'll use the Toho Kingdom one. And I just realized it's probably not gonna let me. I just realized there it is. No, wow, that is so good that we actually did not take me that long to get there. So there's the pleasure cruise ship that we see Godzilla sink after they thought they killed him with the naval search. him deliberately going to Tokyo, and then this is him peacefully sort of chilling before being mutated. Picked up the Movie Monsters maquette Godzilla 54 at Godzilla Fest. Oh, so you picked that up there. I got mine at G Fest. It was not this year's last year's G Fest. It was like one of the figures I was like, I need this. Godzilla -1 had definitely had intense. He had intense, but not like malicious, psychopathic intense. So these adjectives that Aloe adds are essentially to load his point in order for the audience to feel like, oh, this makes sense because he's using all these words to describe minus Goji, rather than just looking what the book says or what the director has said and realizing, oh, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you actually look at these. It feels like he might have watched 98 before any other Godzilla movie and never really shed the confused animal misconception. The problem, too, is the fact that 98 also tries way too hard to sell you on the confused animal misconception, but then ultimately makes a better justification for why Godzilla should be killed over almost any other Godzilla movie. Let us continue, gentlemen.
Another indicator of just how far he has fallen is due to his atomic ray itself. It is so powerful, it actually burns him in the same manner the original nuclear warheads that created him did. He doesn't care about the pain, just wanting to destroy.
Yeah, I ignore the pain when I lift weights. That doesn't mean I care about the gains. I guess you could make that same argument, but I think that's also a silly argument too. If Godzilla's an animal where he's trying to impose himself over his territory, then yes, using the most destructive thing to end the fight as quickly as possible, like an animal, would make sense. But no, we do know that Godzilla does have an explicit rage because, like in both 54 and minus, he is indeed overtly trying to attack.
He displays no curiosity, just wrath.
Yeah, and I would like to see at least maybe a quote, a page number where Godzilla is at least curious or maybe stunned by something. Because there is the clock tower. We could mention those scenes, but I think what's interesting too is if you go to specifically Godzilla Raids Again, so that's going to be page 136 of the novella. And it's going to be starting essentially right from the middle. So right then, flash, flash, streaks of fire fell from the sky. The airplanes flying over Godzilla's head had dropped a series of flares to blind the monster. The strong lights floated down through the air, tracing gently, sloping lines like the ropes of a swing. Godzilla seemed taken aback. He was still staring at the lights when the jets made another pass over his head. Roaring through the air, again they dropped more flares, creating arcing lines that fell from above, illuminating the nighttime sky with sparkling light. Godzilla grew tremendously enraged. Perhaps the lights recalled the loathsome hydrogen bomb test he'd been through. So, yeah, Godzilla's taken aback, but he's not like overtly like, oh, I am curious. I am no longer the angry. Or if you go to page 122, so this is before Anguirus arrives on Owatu Island, and he's like, Godzilla was still trying to reach them. And every time Godzilla moved his hand, Kobayashi tried to evade it. Godzilla was practically on top of them. Like Godzilla in that scene before Anguirus appears is directly just trying to kill these people. And you could argue, well, it's a different Godzilla. But overall, Godzilla's characterization isn't all that different. It's just the circumstances that this Godzilla finds itself in are different from the original, along with the fact that it is literally the same person writing Godzilla in both of these books. So
In his final battle, even after being dredged up from the bottom of the ocean, having the barotrauma literally ripping his body apart, he is still fighting. Even as the atomic energy he is charging up is leaking out of his body, he is still so blinded with rage, he goes on the attack, which ultimately results in his destruction.
okay, so yeah, blind rage still trying to about it like leads to his destruction. Again, going to page 109 of the 54 novelization. Then, right before everyone's eyes splashed, Godzilla's anguish-filled eyes appeared at the surface, spraying everyone. Summoning up what remained of his last strength, he was trying to attack the seagull. So yeah, you mean just like Godzilla 54? And then Godzilla, and this is going on to page 110. Godzilla writhed around, making some big movements with the last of his strength and splash. He collapsed back into the sea, sending up a waterfall's worth of spray. His form started to sink.
Or temporary destruction. Contrast this death with the original Godzilla's death, which everyone mourns both Dr. Serizawa's sacrifice, but also reflects on the tragedy that is Godzilla himself, how he was something created by humanity, and he paid basically for humanity's mistakes.
Okay, so we can look at that as well. So we'll start actually, we'll just actually read all of essentially page 110 and a little bit of page 11. Page 111. Godzilla's dead body sank quickly into the still bubbling water. For some time, his form lay on its side between the seabed boulders, but then it dissolved before everyone's eyes. Professor Yamane stared hard at the surface of the water. There were tears running down his face. The Japanese people had succeeded in wiping Godzilla, that hateful monster, and again, they say Godzilla is hateful monster, from the face of the earth. On the deck of the patrol boat, which had been observing from distance, the press and other VIPs jumped with joy. So, yes, different from what you see on screen, but by Alo's logic, if differences in the -1 novel are acceptable for making your point, then so too would be for the 54 novel. One announcer was speaking with such delirious excitement that he looked ready to swallow the mic whole. What a moving moment. What joy. We've won. With our very own eyes, we watched as Godzilla's dead body sank deep in the ocean to its grave. No mistake about it. This victory was made possible by the young Dr. Serizawa, the scientist of the century. And if you are not, if you don't have this book, then a lot of this right here is being described with exclamation points to explain more about like how joyful they are. On the deck of the Seagull, Ogata was weeping. He had been Serizawa's classmate back in school, and again, this is Ogata being very different from how he is in the movie. Shinkichi and Emiko were also crying, and we can skip over this part here because this is the part where Shinkichi is talking to Emiko about how Serizawa wanted Emiko to have a happy life, except for the dynamic being a little different because no love triangle. But we'll go on to page 111. Which says Dr. Yamane wore a dark expression as he whispered quietly to himself. So what he says in the movie and contextualized here in the novel is him speaking to himself, not to anyone else really here on the boat itself, where he says, but I can't imagine that the Godzilla we saw was the last of his kind. What if the hydrogen bomb tests were to continue? Who knows? Maybe more of his kind might appear somewhere on Earth. So this idea that it's very somber, it's tragic here, is contradicted by how overtly joyous it is in the novel, but solemn in the movie. But if we're to say it's solemn in the movie for Godzilla's death because it's a tragedy, then it is also solemn and tragic for Godzilla's death in the -1 novel as well. So you would have to go back to the -1 novel, and you're going to go to page 190 and 191. Shin being consummated is contrast to the metaphor of the movie because people try to portray him as a victim. We'll get to Shin when we get to Shin. But there we go. So now we're at page 190, 191. And we'll read from essentially the middle of 190 all the way to 191. So Godzilla's gargantuan body, still glowing blue from the heat ray it had been charging, slowly began to disintegrate, with beams of blinding white light piercing its hide as the creature crumbled to pieces in the ocean. Koichi looked down from high above in his parachute as what for years had tormented his dreams and waking nightmares returned to the sea from whence it came. It was finally over. He could have been proud. His heart should have been racing with excitement, but in that moment, all he felt inside was one simple thing. It's over. The men on the ship's decks, too, wore solemn expressions as they watched Godzilla's final moments. Perhaps they knew, deep down, that what they had done here today was something that, by rights, mortal men should not have been capable of. One by one, the sailors raised their hands in salute as the monster fell away. For these Navy men, who'd all risked life and limb in an unwinnable war just 3 years prior, it was the deepest show of respect they could offer the dead. In truth, even the beast itself could be called a victim of that war. Its body having been hideously mutated and scarred by a product of humanity's greatest folly. Perhaps it was for this reason that they felt compelled to salute Godzilla as the creature sank beneath the waves, leaving only a cloud of black smoke in its wake. So, yes, Godzilla in -1 is also looked at as a victim, and that is why you see them saluting, because I always know, even back when the film had just come out, people were confused as to whether they were saluting Shikishima or whether they're saluting Godzilla. And I know in the context of like World War II, I don't remember off the top of my head the specific battle or the specific ship that this took place on. And it's that when I think either an American ship had sunk or a Japanese ship and an American ship had gone back and forth. And after the battle, the Japanese soldiers had saluted the American ship. And just so I can be clear on that matter, I'm going to look it up for our sakes. And I saw Minecraft World in the comments being like, I called it! World War II, Japanese Navy salutes American, I'm gonna say ship. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yes, it is it's saluting a sunken American ship. And again, I know people have their issues with AI and things like that, but we'll stop sharing that for now, and we'll go over to the AI overview they have for this case here. So it's that the Japanese destroyer, the Yukikaze, saluting the sinking USS Johnston during the Battle of Samar in World War II, is in response to the American destroyer's ferocious and courageous resistance against a vastly superior Japanese force. So, yeah, I know, like, for people who aren't super familiar with World War II, like that some saluting in -1 would probably feel out of nowhere, but I do know a few people who were more familiar with World War II history wondering if that was the case, and had asked me if that was intentional, and I believe that is the case. Minecraft, I called it. Yes. And Black Rain, no, you cannot have both sympathy for Koichi and Godzilla. I like how the film leaves it ambiguous as to who they were saluting to. I think that, like, in that case, they can be both saluting Shikishima for his bravery, but also saluting Godzilla. But I think in this case, like, if you were to ask, like, who explicitly, like, are they only saluting? If it's one or the other, it's Godzilla. So, yeah. I just want to go up real quick because I missed a few things. In terms of curiosity in the beginning, after he attacks the watchtower in retaliation of having the light shine in his face, he's looking around, not deliberately attacking until they shoot. Okay. I want to call 98 confusing. I'm rather a driven one, driven by instinct, since we see him actively hunting, scavenging, and nesting. Clover, I would call confused more so. Well, Clover's a baby, too. Or at least that is the retcon for it, is that it's a baby. As for 98, yeah, I would say driven definitely makes more sense, but definitely also, like, curious. Got 98 is very, like, a very curious creature, but again would also make him inconsistent with how Godzilla is actually portrayed in the movies, so doesn't really help the 98 train. But I would say that yes, that is a more accurate contextualization of 98, as always, from the 98 boy himself. And I just want to say I appreciate everyone for sticking on with this, because it has been an hour 20, and we are only 8 minutes into this 23-minute video, and we're still on 1.5 times speed. Don't you just love that? It's Zim's, like, I will put YouTubers on speed and then still, like, take forever to actually get to the point. But I am holding right now at the moment the Godzilla First 70 Years in my lap, because we are gonna have to get to a there's a few things that I want to also highlight in this book that also contradict Alice's point as well.
The tragedy is twofold in the destruction brought upon the city and the unfortunate fate that was Godzilla himself. No such thing is given to Goji. The reason for this lack of reflection is that Goji is a fundamentally different beast than the original was intended to be.
That's also wrong, and that's where I wanted to go to. So we are going to go to, again, Godzilla the first 70 years. So let me just move everything off my desk so I can honk this bad boy up here. So they do talk about rewriting of Godzilla's origin story received critical acclaim worldwide. And again, this is page 104 of Godzilla the first 70 years. So this is the -1 section. And changed the conversation about what a Godzilla film could be. Technically and dramatically, old cliches about men in suits and low budgets gave way to praise for a living, breathing, terrifying Godzilla, a distinctly Japanese, character-driven story about trauma, loss, and redemption rooted in the tragic history of the Second World War, somehow resonated with audiences worldwide. So you talk about a rewriting Godzilla's origin story, but this also has to do with the fact that it's taking place in a different time period, not a different characterization of Godzilla himself, as they go on the next paragraph to talk about how Godzilla -1 personalizes Godzilla's symbolic representation of war and death to achieve an emotional link between the protagonist and the monster that no other film has attempted. And we're going to move over to the next page, which is going to be page not 110. It's actually me 112. Where they do a Q&A with Takashi Yamazaki. And it's the second question says, do you view Godzilla as an animal, a monster, a god? So I see Godzilla as a tatarigami, a curse god. This is a very Japanese concept. It's this idea of someone who was abused or hurt in the past. So therefore a victim, which Allo says is not the case, and then returns in a completely different form to enact revenge, which Godzilla both in 54 -1 does. The people then try to calm that god down to settle the situation. In Japan, Godzilla is something like this. After making this film, I felt like this was just a ritual for calming this kind of god down. I believe that one of the reasons why Godzilla films have been made all this time for that ritual. And then the next question is, why does Godzilla attack Japan? It says, this is sort of like what author and philosopher Yorio Takeshi says, his writings inspired me. In a no play, there might be a ghost and it shows up and tells the audience why he's in such pain. The people listen, and when they finally understand, the ghost goes away. I think Godzilla is similar to that, but Godzilla's way of telling a story is through violence. He shows up, tells a story by destroying things, and then when he's done, he moves on. When I start thinking this way, everything fell into place. So again, he says, he compares Godzilla to this ghost that is telling the audience why he's in pain. So it is tragic in that aspect. And then the next question is, Godzilla -1 visibly connects Godzilla to the atomic bomb in an unprecedented way. We actually see the monster being affected by the test at Bikini Atoll in 1946. So the first Godzilla was made right after the Lucky Dragon incident. So that's how Godzilla and nuclear weapons were connected. But after so many movies, the fact that Godzilla is a metaphor for the bomb wasn't clear any longer. Maybe it's because I value the first film so much that I felt this was one of the most important points. I needed to make it clear again. So yes, at this point, that would be Yamazaki's reading versus Allo's reading. But I would say that in this case, given the fact that Yamazaki also kind of grew up closer to this film's release, it would have been much more immersed in understanding of what the general Japanese sentiment was, as well as the personal philosophies and understandings of the people behind the first Godzilla. It would make far more sense that Yamazaki's read of 54 makes more sense than Allo's read of it, especially when, again, Hayama's book and all of the material seems to line up with not just my reading of it, but also Yamazaki's reading of the original Godzilla, which lines up with his interpretation of Godzilla. And this is a solo stream. Yes, this is a solo stream, unfortunately. Once again, it falls back to Allo's obsession with the idea that Godzilla's confused animal, despite even in the original film, he's wrathful and violent with intent. Indeed, and the reason why I keep bringing this up is because he hammers this home and he makes this a huge point of his thesis, but then couches what can be considered quote-unquote faithful to be in certain lingos, as it were, which we'll get into once he keeps going.
Something that is shared with Shin Godzilla, which, rather than a mutant dinosaur-like creature, or even something created by nuclear weapons, Shin is instead born from nuclear waste dumping in Tokyo Bay, still keeping his nuclear core, but his origins are actually hardly ever elaborated on beyond this. Well, what I am critical of -1 for is the lack of elaboration on Godzilla's backstory, despite their...
except for the fact that like we understand actually far more about -1's backstory than we do about 54's, because we directly see what Godzilla looks like before the bombs. We understood its relationship with the Islanders in more detail visually, since we actually see Godzilla's effect on Odo Island. We overtly see what happened to Godzilla, and therefore why he goes from a creature that was like really never seen before and really only a legend into ultimately being the monster he is. So once again, I feel like this has something to do with the bone he has to pick with -1, because in other videos he has stated that he doesn't feel -1 is as perfect as people say it is. And I think that has led into his overall bias of this.
Being one, in contrast, Shin Godzilla doesn't have really a backstory. He's not supposed to be a character who has changed and became something new. He's, a formless, constantly evolving horror.
Again, this is the same issue that Godzilla is a quote-unquote concept runs into. Just because Shin evolves and changes his appearance doesn't mean that Shin Godzilla isn't like actually something we see is a tangible creature. It just has the ability to change its appearance due to extenuating circumstances.
While presenting him with next to no backstory may seem like a weakness, the movie is actually built around this in such a way that he really doesn't display a personality, making his lack of backstory more or less fundamentally irrelevant. As well as the difference being that he was never intended to have a backstory that was explained. The issue being the prior ones had a backstory but was left out.
But let's go back.
As well as the difference being that he was never intended to have a backstory that was explained. The issue being the prior ones had a backstory but was left out.
No, we know -1's backstory. It's visually shown far more in the 54's, and like with 54, we learned about the fact that before Godzilla became Godzilla, it was a creature that was living peaceably, and some influence due to nuclear energy or nuclear waste of some kind is what ends up causing Godzilla to be the way he is. I would have loved to have read a novelization of Shin. I bet there is. I think there is. I'm probably wrong on that. It'd be interesting, though, to get into the minds of some of the characters in Shin more. If I hear one more person say that Shin is a cosmic evolving creature, I'm going to start the horses. Like, I know, Gojin, if you're watching, the idea that Shin is cosmic horror does not make sense. I am sorry. It is not a good point. And I'm not just saying this as someone who lives in Lovecraft country. I'm just saying this as someone who likes the Lovecraft mythos a lot. And I think when people talk about cosmic horror as a genre, they misunderstand it because they actually don't like cosmic horror. They just like the aesthetics of cosmic horror, which is like portals, tentacles, madness, etc. They probably have not read a lot of Lovecraft's work, probably only read adaptations of it made by other people, and in some cases may just actively hate Lovecraft as a person. So as a result, the perception that has grown around cosmic horror, I don't take too seriously. But yes, in this case, Shin Godzilla's story does not line up with a classic cosmic horror type of tale. I would like to see a novelization of GMK. That would be really cool. I do like the Godzilla novelization project. Like, just having more kaiju books would be nice. Speaking of kaiju books, if you are being so kind, if you want to sign up for the Patreon, I am going to be having a few segments of chapters for Kaiju Quarantine. They're going to be coming up soon, as well as I have a short story that I will be posting to the channel that's quarantine adjacent, let's say. But that full thing is going to be available for free on YouTube. But for things on the book that I'll be trying to get out by the end of this year or the start of next year, that's all going to be on Patreon. But other things I can recommend is things like Kaiju Cold War. The author for that is in my Discord, which I just realized I've not plugged the Discord all this entire time. Let me do the invite as per usual. Again, it's fun. Join if you are interested and want to like post things. For example, the art at the start of these streams, which I like doing these at the start of the stream. Those people who put things into the stream submissions channel on the Discord, that's where the priority goes, as well as people who want to join. That's where I usually post links for people to come onto the stream. So if you ever want to do a little powwow, debate, etc., the Discord is where you're gonna find me. But back to the video.
The closest we really get to a personality, if you could call it that, is his instinctive reactions to outside stimulus. In this case, massive pain-inducing panic. Whenever he mutates from stress, of course, is how the way his body works, adapting to new situations that cause him pain, he panics. Running first as Kamazakun, then after mutating into his third form, he screams before bolting out into the ocean to cool himself off as his reactor is overheating. And after turning into his fourth form, perfecting his cooling system, he actually doesn't even engage with the military or even human structures as a whole. He's an indifferent, almost force of nature at this point. The only time that he engages with the military after going into this form is when the B2 spirits drop massive bunker busters on him, which tear into his flesh and detonate inside of his body.
I think that's like, for the most part, this is all pretty true, because with Shin, the only interactions you have is him moving down the street as Kamada-kun, and then the standoff he has as Shinagawa-kun, the engagement with the military, which is where the shot here comes from, and you could read the bridge being flipped as him just deciding to kick that bridge over to knock out some of the tanks, which I could go either way on for that case. But yes, for the most part, the Shin does not engage as directly with the military as either Godzilla 54 or Minus do. Another I want to see are the ones for GVK and GFK, along with the Random House books, but that's about it, really. I do have 2 of the Random House books. One of them belonged to a friend. I still need to give that back to him, and he just hasn't come to my store, and we haven't had time to meet up so I can give that back to him. I'm so sorry, dude. If you ever see this video. Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars is another one that I bought years ago. I just did not ever get around to reviewing. And yes, obligatory Nemesis mention. A guy made a whole video about how Shin will turn into something biblical. Oh, interesting. Link me that video. We may go over it if I feel like it's something to discuss, because that'd be interesting to see. Novelization for at least the Heisei Gamma trilogy also would be a cool thing too. I mean, isn't Shin's lack of expression on purpose because he's supposed to be an incomprehensible force, not in the cosmic Lovecraft way, but in the way that we have no way to understand him? Yes. And I think that also ties into like what people mean when they colloquially mean like force of nature. But then also, I think when people say like, oh, you have no way to understand him. Well, in Lovecraft books and cosmic horror, they say we cannot understand what Godzilla is. So therefore, cosmic horror, which isn't that a Dangerfield video? Lante says Zaffy, so I don't think so. Although maybe Dangerfield took something from that video, which wouldn't be surprising to say the least.
More causing him significant pain. This spurs on his development of the atomic ray, which he uses to destroy all the B2s, and bury Tokyo in a sea of flame. But none of this is conscious action. It is simply instinctive reaction to something that causes pain. He actually exhausts himself and has to shut down for several weeks after doing this. Even at the end of the film, when he wakes back up, he displays what could most generously be described as a rudimentary intelligence. He targets the drones with a full-force dorsal spine laser barrage, utilizing his inbuilt phased radar array to detect them, but he's not intelligently...
I know early he mentioned the fact that it's instinctual, not sentience, but like, there are plenty of animals that are sentient and conscious. But again, I think he's probably using in the colloquial sense in that like Godzilla doesn't have the same cognitive levels of understanding that humans do, but then also, again, lots of animals have things for subjective experiences like pain, fear, joy, etc. So if Godzilla is lashing out in response to pain, then Godzilla would be sentient and therefore is consciously responding to what's around him. I think those words being used are just a response to the idea that Shin is impassive and doesn't really say any or do anything. So as a result, he's not sentient and it's just instincts. And I think that just comes from a misunderstanding of like what instincts mean. And when people say something is moving instinctually rather than consciously. I found one Random House book by chance at a bookstore. It was Godzilla at World's End. I want to say that's the one I have. I could totally be wrong, but I do think I have Godzilla World's End, but I got mine at G-Fest. I'm curious, yeah. Shape, how much was yours? Because I know I got mine for $10 at G-Fest, which $10 for a book that's like very rare. I consider that a steal in my eyes.
Deciding what to do. He's just going full throttle. In fact, this ends up biting him in the butt when he burns through all of his nuclear fuel in basically a pack.
Oh, there we go. Another ad. So this is Zimcast, sponsored by National Car. Okay, let's go with that. National Car.
Only time in the entire film he causes destruction that is not prompted from a reaction of pain is the Sea of Fire he leaves Tokyo, which is after he first obtains the atomic ray and is just unable to control it.
But so he says he's unable to control it, but then going back
from a reaction of pain, destruction that is not prompted from a reaction of pain is the Sea of Fire he leaves Tokyo, which
so if the atomic breath was a response to the pain that he caused, then yes, that is still prompted by the pain. So that he just undermined his point right afterwards.
Is after he first obtains the atomic ray and is just unable to control it. After all, much like Michimochi Eevee, there are no thoughts behind those eyes. At best, it could be a simple association of Michimochi Eevee.
I think it's also interesting that he mentions there's no thought behind the eyes, and this is the scene where right afterwards Godzilla retreats back into the ocean because there is a thought behind those eyes.
There are no thoughts behind those eyes. At best, it could be a simple association of things that fly equal pain. This renders him something of a panic.
Well, that would also be wrong too, because there was the helicopters that were pelting him with their rotary cannons before the BT spirits. So the idea that flying things equals pain would be a very sharp contrast to what he originally thought, because even we can also look at the fact that as they drop the bombs on him with the like helicopters and stuff and the planes before the B2 spirits, he uses his eyelids to protect his eyes. So there's definitely more consciousness behind Shin than he's like letting on. But I would say that overall, compared to like how wrong he is about -1, he's not overtly as wrong about Shin.
Wanderer, aimlessly going from place to place. This, much like -1,
except again, this part's just wrong here. I'm like, you're doing good, and then you just say something that's just completely wrong. So let me go all the way back so we can talk about that.
Of things that fly equal pain. This renders him something of a panicked wanderer, aimlessly going from place to place.
Except for the fact that he was feeding on stuff in Tokyo Bay, was in Tokyo Bay, so he didn't wander from Tokyo Bay. And then whether we know Shin's motivations or not, there's a deliberate path that Shin takes as Kamada-kun before retreating because of a certain reason, and then returning as his fourth form. So he's not just wandering from place to place, because that would imply some level of randomness to his actions in terms of his movement, when it's very much more deliberate than he's giving it credit for. But again, with Shin, he's closer to the ball than he is with -1. I will say that. I think it was $5 books. The bookstore sold used books, but thankfully it was still in good condition. Hey, half of what I got. No, not bad, my man. Anime girl. No offense to Aloe there, but just because you don't see an outside expression doesn't mean there aren't thoughts going on. Yeah, again, it's not. This isn't as bad as the -1 point, where there's so many like sources that just contradict what he's saying.
This, much like -1, lacks the crucial horror of the original and the tragedy that is of the original. Instead, it focuses far more on the economic effects that Godzilla's destruction.
Considering the fact that like the whole point of Godzilla's design was to be grotesque, to underlie the tragedy of the character, I think it's interesting to say that like it doesn't go into the horror or the tragedy. Godzilla literally looks like a giant burn victim. Without a doubt, Godzilla is definitely very much a tragic victim here still. Once again, committing actions that are inexcusable and therefore justify why humanity has to fight against him. But this idea that no, there's like none of it there makes just no sense.
On the entirety of Japan. Though it does highlight how this was something that was created by humanity, though it mentions that it was the Americans who dumped the nuclear waste into the bay.
Which I don't believe is the case. We don't really know explicitly who. They just talk about like dumping earlier in Japan's history, which is what results in Shin.
So where does this leave these two with respect to faithfulness to the original? -1 captures the look and the letter of what the original is on.
So if we're talking about the letter, then yes, the Godzilla -1 is more faithful by the metric he just said, because if he's saying to the letter, not the spirit, that's irrelevant. -1 would still be more faithful than Shin, and I think a lot of Shin fans would still agree.
On paper, things like framing of shots, the manner in which he starts and is mutated, and somewhat of the tone. But his personality, his mannerisms are a far cry from the originals.
So again, that is just contradicted by like so much text that if anyone's catching this right now, just rewind a little bit, and the vast majority of this like now hour and 41-minute like stream has been me going over how this line here in these books does not like line up with what you've said earlier. It's insane to me. I just think Shin can show more expressions visually, and that's what I don't like about Shin. Not saying Shin's bad, but I like a Godzilla that have more expressions visually. No, I completely agree with that. I prefer something more like -1 or the Heisei films or even the Showa films over something like Shin. I still see anime girl.
Again, he is very deliberately hostile to humanity and singularly focused on carnage, where 54
Again, a lie, and so is 54 by that same token.
was lashing out in confusion.
Again, no sources to back this up.
And is more akin to a force of nature with some curiosity.
Again, need source.
-1 is more or less a straight-up monster. In fact, almost something of a caricature of the original Godzilla. His personality bearing far more resemblance to something like King Ghidorah or Destoroyah.
Not really, because in King Ghidorah's case, King Ghidorah just came to Earth of his own accord to destroy things. He has no connection to the planet, where Godzilla does have a direct connection to humanity. And in Destroy's case, Destroy is supposed to be like an antithesis to Godzilla, but just essentially a deadlier one, because he's a prehistoric creature mutated by a super weapon that could change the course of history. And in the Godzilla continuity does, because of the Oxygen Destroyer killing the one thing that changed the course of history when it came to things like nuclear weapons. So, one sec. And I think you all just caught that like absolutely awful cough there. I apologize, but like, ugh.
The tragic nature of his creation is also either absent or very heavily downplayed to simply...
No, that's just your preferences to like how you think that's the case. But once again, the text supports this.
The start before being abandoned partway through. Shin, on the other claw, has nothing really to do with the original's origin beyond nuclear involvement. He's a different sort of nuclear accident. His interactions with humans are the complete opposite of -1's. He ignores them. He is almost indifferent to humanity until something simply causes pain to him, and he goes to deal with that source of pain. It's a lack of awareness for any of his...
Yeah, well, even in the Godzilla first 70 years, they talk about how, and this is going to be on page 403 for anyone curious, and they're looking at the book for Godzilla the first 70 years, and it's the Shin Godzilla section, which says, in an early concept for Shin Godzilla by directors Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi, would have seen Godzilla evolve from its traditional form into something entirely different. We wanted to do a movie where Godzilla transforms, and it was rejected. Higuchi said at the G-Fest Godzilla convention in Chicago in 2017, which I was there for. Director Anno was also unsuccessfully proposed a sequel, Shin Godzilla Strikes Back, which was to be directed by Higuchi. Anno created a rough outline of a story in the style of the Toho Champion Matsuri era movies and aimed at people who weren't fans of Shin Godzilla. So, yes, in one way or another, by Allo's logic, where if Godzilla is a concept rather than a character, then there would have been a more faithful Shin Godzilla movie, in the sense of Shin would have been closer to something like the Champion era Godzilla, which would make it faithful to a Godzilla. But it's really interesting how much quibbling he has to do on -1 side to get Shin slightly more on the faithful metric, because Shin in so many ways is a modern adaptation of a Godzilla story, but there are so many differences that's what makes Shin so unique, and why a lot of people just aren't fans of it, which I understand completely. The worst thing is that Shin doesn't even actually act like he's really in pain. That's just imposed on the movie because of his looks and the lyrics of Who Will Know. We don't even know if Shin can feel pain outside of his weak point on the back. Yeah.
His surroundings, whereas the original Godzilla actually did display quite an awareness of his surroundings. He was curious of things like the clock tower, flipping over bridges.
Okay, flipping over the bridge. So again, one of the chapters earlier, pages earlier, where we talk about Godzilla roaring in victory, is coming up after he flips over the bridge. But let's stop the video. Let's go to the bridge flip. So right here, we can talk about the fact that, yeah, Godzilla could be just curiously just taking a chomp out of this, and considering the fact that we know based on the text that Godzilla is almost always described as enraged, and earlier lets out a roar of victory based on the context of the scene from the book's perspective, this is more than likely another example of just angrily Godzilla flipping over something rather than curiously flipping something over because he's just confused. He didn't do nothing. My Godzilla innocent, man. That's right. The worst is actually that Shin doesn't burrow, eat fish, or sneak attack the melee. Just stands there looking goofy. Then them eyes. Hey, I'll take a Shin over 98 any day. I'm sorry. Shin's still better thematically than 98.
And much like -1, the tragic aspect of the character really isn't a focus. This renders both of them in a very interesting position because it's hard to compare. They're both splinter.
Well, again, it's hard to compare from Allah's perspective because his misreading of -1 makes it like Shin actually has some points in its favor, when in reality Shin doesn't, because Shin is a very, like, it's an interesting Godzilla film to say the least, but in terms of it being faithful, not really.
Fragments. Close, but not quite like the original Godzilla. In kind of a strange way, they're almost two halves of a singular whole that is the original Godzilla. If you take the two of them and you put them together, you actually would get relatively close to the original Godzilla. But there would still be a lot of key differences, since both of them do embody very different aspects of the original to an almost extreme degree. This is actually the way that every single version of Godzilla is. Since again,
not really. If we're gonna say -1 isn't faithful to 54, the closest Godzilla we see to 54 is 55. The only reason why 55 wouldn't be considered in that running for Allo is because of something he'll say later, which undermines not only the entire point of making a video like this in the first place, but just also it's the implicit implications behind it are something I would take issue with.
And he is less of a character and more of a concept given a face.
Again, going to the concept, not a character, then once again, Allo, your tweets about Wingard messing up Godzilla's character makes no sense, because Godzilla is a concept, not a character, so therefore I don't understand why you'd be complaining about Godzilla's character being ruined by Wingard.
None will ever match the original perfectly.
And there it is. So that's one of the things that he does, is that he couches the thesis about something being faithful to 54 is that it has to perfectly match the original. And in nowhere of a definition of faithful is it stated that you need to perfectly match something. And when he means perfectly, he means something else entirely.
And this holds true for every different Godzilla. He is something that is applicable to different scenarios, and those scenarios will inform the way that Godzilla is made. He's more like an RPG character, one where you spec him into different stats and specific traits depending on the needs of the story. Are you going to make him more sympathetic? Go all in like he is with KOTM, or...
So again, even if you're treating him like an RPG character, there are RPGs where you are playing as a singular character. Your choices may influence and your aesthetics may change what that character will look like to some degree or other, but it's still a character with a distinct voice to it. So this whole idea of RPGs also doesn't make sense, because I bet what he is trying to do is state that Godzilla is like one of those creative characters rather than those RPGs where you are given a set character and are experiencing it through their eyes and choosing little ways to express your interpretation of that one character. So something like a Skyrim or Dark Souls versus a Mass Effect or Witcher. If it was not intentional, he would have just walked past the bridge, except he seemed to deliberately turn and flip it over. Yeah, and then again in the novel, Roaring in Victory, which is not in the -1 novel, which he cites as being a show of Minus's psychopathy, essentially.
Not at all like he is with Ultima. Do you want him to care about humanity? Do you want him to be indifferent to humanity? Him to, in some way, care about our wish to protect us? Or is it an added benefit of him engaging with something else? Or does he want to completely wipe us out, a la GMK?
Then it's also a misreading of GMK, because GMK does not want to genocide or kill all of humanity. GMK has a very specific bone to pick with a certain group of people, and that is what is key to his character and underlies his themes.
Is his backstory more tragic or less tragic? Was he a mutant, or was he just simply always there? That's what makes him Godzilla. It's this combination of traits drawing on various different aspects, both from the original and other incarnations.
Yeah, but again, if something is trying to be faithful, then if they are pulling more from the original, they would be more faithful. I think the only reason why he's saying that Godzilla being so different is what makes him Godzilla is just because of the fact that these films have already been here. They've stood the test of time, as it were. So as a result, he's just accepting them all as being Godzilla without critically being like, well, Godzilla here presents traits that are less faithful than how Godzilla is here. So if we're talking about films that are closer in tone or themes or characterization to the original, there would be some form of ranking you could make, which Al does not seem to want to accept, which is weird, but whatever.
Is a large part of why nothing ever has or ever will be able to perfectly match the original.
That's an impossibility fallacy. And for those wondering, we'll stop sharing and I will present what an impossibility fallacy is. Whether he is one or not, Godzilla is a very complex character. Yeah, again, Godzilla is a character. He's not a concept. To be fair, though, we don't know for certain when would GMK's Godzilla destruction would have stopped if he kept going. Well, considering the fact that like there's a ghost who explicitly says like, yeah, this is why Godzilla is here to do this specific thing. It's more than likely Godzilla probably would have stopped his destruction had he accomplished his goal. And just his goal would have probably taken a long time considering what that goal was. But let's look at what a impossibility fallacy is. So it can refer to two related concepts: claiming something is impossible when it is only difficult, or demanding an impossible level of evidence to accept a claim. He commits both of these. So the first one he's committing is this one right here, which is claiming something is possible when it is only difficult, which we'll just go back to what he says.
This sort of spec in natures or aspects both from the original and other incarnations is a large part of why nothing ever has or ever will be able to perfectly match the original.
So in his mind, nothing ever will be able to match the original. So implicitly, he's making the impossibility fallacy there.
Sort of spec in nature of Godzilla also reflects the way in which the story, this sort of spec in character nature of Godzilla is also reflective of the nature of the story he is a part of.
No, like as long as like you follow the tenets of what the original story is, you can put that character of Godzilla into various different circumstances and it'd still be faithful. That's like saying an author who has written a character in one book can't make a faithful interpretation outside of that first book because the circumstances of the story have changed.
With the original Godzilla, the movie was specifically about the danger of super weapons, not specifically just nuclear weapons. It's just that nuclear weapons were the only super weapons of the time. It was a cautionary tale of the development of them at all, and the consequences that they and nuclear weapons will incur on the world. That's the reason why the Ocean Destroyer exists. It is a super weapon to cancel out the super weapon that is the atomic bomb, which is embodied of Godzilla, who is also an embodiment of the victims of the atomic bomb.
And yes, Minus, despite having a primarily being about the story of Koichi Shikishima, conceptually and thematically, Godzilla would still fulfill that role of being the danger of super weapons, because in the new world that this Japan is being thrust into, they now have already been bombed once, and now will have to live in the fear that as this age is continued, new super weapons could be introduced to the world that could threaten Japan's security again.
Shin Godzilla was deliberately a call-out to how poorly handled the Fukushima nuclear disaster was by the Japanese government. This is reflected in the story with respect to the film. The overly bureaucratic nature of it, which can cause it to drag on in certain places, is deliberate. It was critical of that exact thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that he can get Shin's characterization pretty well, but like not for -1. And once again, because I've already seen him gripe about how people treat -1, I feel like this is like either implicitly or explicitly deliberate of him getting things wrong about -1. Godzilla as a character is a combination of traits. Movies can explore those different traits. Just because they focus on a specific trait doesn't make it not faithful. I think that like there are definitely cases where Godzilla's character has changed. Like early into late Showa, Godzilla's character does go through a dramatic shift, and Honda does bemoan this himself. So I do think that there are cases where like Godzilla stopped becoming as faithful of a character thematically as he was, but because obviously it's still legally owned by Toho and they're still producing official Godzilla products, it's just sort of accepted that yes, that is how Godzilla is now as a character. Instead of like looking at what the intent was behind Godzilla originally and sort of analyzing it from there. I wonder, has anyone in film gone blind seeing those atomic breaths, since there are people that were blinded from looking at the explosions of nuclear bombs? No. That would be cool if that was the case, but no, I don't believe so. I think like you'll see people like cover their eyes from the light, but not actually go blind.
Seeing as how a earthquake and tsunami caused that nuclear disaster, this is why Godzilla is a more detached character acting as a force of nature humanity can't really do anything about. Then there's -1, which is a bit of an anomaly in we don't really know what the movie is supposed to be about. Various things have been floated around from he is supposed to be some sort of embodiment of divine retribution on Japan for what they did in World War II, which is really not the most likely that he's a corporeal entity.
Yeah, it's not like because he's a corporeal entity like GMK, who is a corporeal entity and was revived by the souls of angry World War II victims. And again, this is 2 months ago, so this came out in August. The first 70-year Godzilla book had come out, and we just went over what Yamazaki said Godzilla was in this story and how he feels about the franchise as a whole. So this just seems like a blatant lack of understanding of the text, but also just not doing any research. Didn't she know Zim? Or Godzilla's in the public domain, according to Dr. Skipper. That is correct. How could I be so blind to the Skipper agenda? I apologize. Hello, Skipper. Dr. Skipper. Maybe I'm dumb, but how is a bomb any more personal than a natural disaster? It's not. It's really not. It's just like nuclear weapon versus natural disaster. People like to use these as buzzwords in the community because that's just what people have called Godzilla at certain points in order to mean something that's kind of nebulous. Like I would say in a lot of cases, something like 84, Godzilla is both a representation of nuclear weapons, but also a natural disaster at this point. And isn't shit about the incompetent handling of disaster by the Japanese consulate in response to that nuclear power plant. That is correct.
To the two more commonly floated around, but ones that still don't have complete support by the movie itself, which is that he is meant to be simply a vicious weapon. He is a destroyer and always was. Something that conflicts with his nature at the start of the movie.
Well, it's interesting you say this conflicts with his nature, but that's kind of what you describe him as throughout your entire video, because you say he's like lashing out, relishing in deaths, things like that. So are you in a way saying that your read of the film is wrong? In that case, I'll be like, cool, take the L in that case. I respect it, but still.
His curiosity and him with the Odo Islanders. The most likely and the one that has the most support is that he is supposed to be an embodiment of the way war changes someone. Considering this is all that the arc Shikishima goes through, I think this is what the intention was, and those scenes that would have been filmed on Odo Island would have gone a great deal in helping this. But sadly, we didn't get those.
But we don't get those, but the theater program for 54 is good to support your points, as is the book. But then also these cut scenes that we never see would make him more sympathetic, which would make him more faithful to 54. Like it's this web of contradictions that I don't understand how he misses when he made this video. And even I think it's like very similar to what the original video was like as well.
It's why it leaves Minus Goji on a bit of an unstable footing as to what he is. Beyond simply being something that is very different from what the original Godzilla is supposed to be. So, bringing everything back full circle, who is more faithful?
All right, here's the $1 million question. Before we get to that, I'm curious, does anyone know where you think he's going to go with this? Yes, in this case, Shin's not just a stand-in for the nuclear power plant. He's also a stand-in for the tsunami that caused the issues with the power plant. So he's essentially thematically two of those things. So Godzilla as a character won't go into the public domain really anytime soon. I know the film for 54 goes in the public domain in like a couple years, but not that long. One sec. Oh, wrong one. It's like how Disney was with Steamboat Willie. More than likely that'll be the case, but I think as the character, they'll still have more direct control over it. Plus, like copyright protections and copyright law in Japan is different from how it is in the US. And just that's how laws in general are, because if you're anyone who's like posted contents like Toku content or Godzilla content on YouTube and it gets claimed by these Japanese companies, even though it's completely fair use, that is why. So like their copyright law is also a little different as well. So we've got two saying Shin. Anyone think it's gonna be -1? Because it clearly is about to pick a -1. I want to see if there's anyone who's like maybe he might come around to the last second and be like, it's -1, guys. Wasn't Godzilla about the dangers of nuclear power and the ramifications thereof, not just World War II specifically? Yes. But let's see what he says.
The truth is, really neither.
It's neither, guys, but here's his reasoning. Ready?
Both embodiments of different aspects of Godzilla that have been
with 20.
And there, of course, we get cock-blocked by an ad. So this is Zimcast, sponsored by Chewy, even though I don't have a dog. Speaking of dogs, I hope, Vic, your dog's doing all right. Since I'm like a Boston guy, this is kind of all kinds of offensive to me. I'm sorry. I'm 47 brand. The Zimcast does not allow this sponsorship.
Shin Godzilla starts as a very different concept that edges closer to what the original is in his final formation, and Minus Goji starts off closer to the original, but as he goes, it begins to heavily deviate.
So he doesn't really prove Shin gets closer to 54 at all, since he talks about how Shin has like essentially no personality throughout the entire analysis of Shin. And with -1, he's just completely off when it comes to just -1's characterization in general, being contradicted by almost every source. What a twist! Where are the shock collar ads? Oh my goodness. No!
Once again, this is something that every version of Godzilla shares. I don't think it actually matters which one is the more faithful Godzilla.
There it is. It doesn't matter which is more faithful, which would then undermine the point of making this video in the first place. A video that you essentially did two versions of. But it doesn't matter, guys.
Because unless we get a shot-for-shot, line-for-line remake that also includes everything from the theater program, we will never get a completely faithful Godzilla.
So then he contradicts himself here, and this is the other half of the impossibility fallacy, which is demanding an impossible level of evidence to accept a claim. Of course, he's not trying to accept a claim, but he's trying to set the standard of, unless we get a shot-for-shot remake with the theater program information added, then there won't be a faithful Godzilla 54 or a faithful Godzilla next to 54, except for the fact that the theater program is not in the film. So therefore, if you add stuff to the theater, add stuff from the theater program, it would make it inherently different from the original 54, which would make it no longer a shot-for-shot, line-to-line remake of 54. So it's self-refuting in this request, which I believe is the point, because as he says, it doesn't really matter which is more faithful. And there's this one word that he'll say that I believe adds more to this idea that it has very little to do with actually analyzing which is more faithful and more to do with optics.
Something that no film has ever, and more so, I think, ever should.
And also saying should ever do implies a sort of inherent moral weight to the action where not only does being more faithful not matter, if they were to do it, it has to be this way that I've described, which is self-refuting because it contradicts the premise that I've set up. Because you want to add things, but also have it be a shot-for-shot remake. But then ultimately, they shouldn't ever do that in the first place.
Try doing. It is all these different forms, different versions of Godzilla that make the series so interesting. To discuss and debate about each of them respectfully.
So there it is. It's respectfully. I think that that's the thing is that this idea has to do with the fact that it has everything to do with optics, debating, and discussions about Godzilla as a character rather than actually analyzing and coming to a conclusion. Because I don't really think Allo wants there to be any kind of consensus or understanding when it comes to these topics. More or less, everyone kind of comes in with their own opinion. They shouldn't really be challenged on their opinion, and if they do, that's bad, and it's bad because it's probably not being done in a respectful manner. So he's essentially kneecapped his entire point at the end here by saying this. He and the Anthony guy talk the same. No, I think Alo's better than Anthony. At least like Alo is essentially a kaiju channel, so I will give him that. He's someone who's actually like in the community, talking, interacting with people there, versus Doctor who does not interact with the community really at all, and just sort of tourist jumps from IP to IP because he's on one side of the culture war. That's really it. Yep. Except if they made a shot for Charmy and people will complain about it being just the same movie. Trust me, I've seen this complaint for other movies. Yeah, but again, he's saying he wants it to be a shot for shot remake, but also include things that weren't even in the film, which would no longer make it a shot for shot remake. If they did that, then they'd be pulling the same thing Disney did with their remakes. Well, that's the thing is that like not only would it'd be similar to what Disney's doing, but in a lot of ways, I think maybe they probably do a better job, honestly, because there's no like real agenda behind their choices to do that. I think it would be because like, oh, we have such a respect for the original, we really do want to do it the best we can, while being like, well, this isn't really good. This isn't a good look. We need to change that. We need to change this. I think there's so much reverence for the original Godzilla that they never would do what the Disney and DreamWorks live action remakes have ever done. Yeah, no, Al is way more respectable than Mr. Who.
While we have our favorites, we have our least favorites, Godzilla is always Godzilla.
Again, self-refuting. If Godzilla is always Godzilla, but Godzilla is a concept rather than a character, which means Godzilla can really be anything, then therefore there isn't a Godzilla at all. Godzilla can be this right here, that's Godzilla. That's not Godzilla. That's Godzilla. This is Godzilla. That's Godzilla. This is Godzilla. That's Godzilla. We're all Godzillas here. I guess Shinoda was right. Godzilla's inside each one of us. It's the Godzillas we made along the way.
Different aspects reflected from a common source that can all trace their roots back to the original one.
Yeah, and then essentially not admitting that, yes, there are ones that are closer than others. So essentially, yeah, no, we're all just sort of, we're all in this together type of beat where it's not rocking the boat. It's essentially a very like milquetoast response to this question, because if you were to imply that, yes, there are versions that are more faithful than others, it probably might upset someone who feels like their Godzilla really isn't keeping with the original. And instead of actually having that discussion, it's essentially bowing to this idea of homogeneity in the sense of, no, they're all just equally good, equally valid, all equally just faithfully Godzilla, but faithful doesn't really matter.
No matter how distant they get. Apologies if this video is kind of almost a little inconclusive. It's kind of a weird topic to cover with regards to Godzilla, because he is such a varied character. What one person will say is more faithful is something that someone else may disagree on.
Yeah, and then you'd have to look at the criteria those people are making to make a judgment and call on that. Like, it's inconclusive, but it feels like it's not inconclusive because there really isn't a good answer, but more because we don't want to have that answer because it makes certain people uncomfortable.
there's no, again, empirical way to do it beyond simply shot-for-shot remake.
Again, impossibility fallacy.
But I want to thank you guys for watching. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like on the video, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe for more. And I will see you guys next week, where we...
And this is all just sort of prepping for this next video. What I do want to do is I need to find... Where is it? So I need to switch it up to the newest points. And there we go. Let me share that. Yeah, so hey, there's Shape right there. Hello. But yeah, so I see this guy's like Max, which if this is an alt, I'm going to be very, very disappointed if this is an alt, but because the guy's right. I still don't get why people complain over my faithfulness when it never exists. It's again because of the impossibility fallacy that you've created in your mind, which is why you believe that things can't be faithful in that case. And I really like this to me. Shit, I might as well want a different takes on the big G, going more into supernatural. Might as well going in a combine of a raffle god. The raffle god. The holy number is 04. And how what changes someone, which is the correct take. So yeah, there is a correct take, but you can't empirically make this point. And this is why I'm saying that it's almost dishonest what he's doing, because he's saying there is a correct take, and it's that they're just different takes, and it's just so milquetoast. Like, just stand on business and actually empirically go through these things instead of just your own take, and you could be quite wrong on something. And yeah, just like expand your horizons, please. Like, it is baffling how, because I remember Aloe had a little discussion with me after his first video, and was so adamant about these points, but wasn't able to actually back them up with any sources at all. And it's just, well, it's just all my opinion. I will say if 98 is more closely a remake of the original 54 than most of the reboots in the franchise. I would say it follows a similar story beats to 54 than some of the other reboots, but in terms of like thematic as a character, no. Godzilla 98 was more of a Beast for 1,000 Battles remake than a Godzilla movie. Yeah, I should probably just do that as a short, probably. That might be interesting, even though like that whole thing has been done to death at this point. But that is the video, guys. I thank you all for watching who have stayed on to watch this. And as always, when it comes to anyone I go over, don't harass them, don't do silly things. But yeah, if you want to bring your own takes to his video, you're more than welcome to do so. Just be respectful, please. Don't be silly billies. And just knowing how Aloe is, given how he's handled things in the past, that's essentially just asking for trouble. But if he ever wants to debate, which I don't think he will, purely because of the fact that he just is gonna be like, oh, it's my opinion, and won't provide any sources. But I will always gladly debate anyone on anything, just like 05, which is fun. And I am happy that we're seeing more people just talk about Godzilla in a way where we have these discussions like this. And I do hope we get more debates like 05 in the future. If Aloe ever comes on, I'd love to do that too. But yeah, share your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if as always with the streams, people who may be watching later on, if there's something you see where you want to respond to, put it in the comments as well. You know where to find me. We'll just post it there. Find me on X, formerly Twitter, Patreon, like I said earlier. Instagram is where I do a lot of my art posting, as well as DeviantArt, but that's a little slower. And I multi-stream to Twitch and to Facebook, but then I also have backups for my stuff on Odyssey and BitChute, which I'm still trying to get all my content on there in case something were to ever happen to me. And that's going to be it. There's going to be 2 other uploads this week, probably Wednesday and Thursday for those because of just, again, extenuating circumstances, unfortunately. So yeah, I will have streams planned for next week and the week after. One of those will be a writer stream, and yeah, stay tuned for those, guys. We're gonna be coming up on November soon, so there's other stuff for that planned, and then December, and hopefully you'll get to see more stuff about my book. And yeah, have a good one, guys, and remember,
Semper Fi, motherfucker!